So, welcome to the first episode of We Never Left, and boy, do we have a great one for you. So, we have Anton from Pendle. Pendle is a top 10 DeFi protocol. They're primarily in EVM, and they've been riding the wave of the whole LSDFi, the whole LRT, and Anton is a core team member there. In fact, Anton and myself, we used to be in Kyber. So his history was working as an engineer in Kyber, and then he joined the core team with Pendle. So Anton, thanks again for being here today. Welcome.
It's really a pleasure to be here in this inaugural first episode of We Never Left. So the name is also very apt, right, given this market, because, as you've hinted, since the last cycle and during the entire bear market, you and I never left the space, right? So as a brief intro, my name is Anton, and I'm a core team member at the Pendle, protocol, and I basically lead ecosystem growth. So what that initially entails is that I lead all the on-chain partnerships, such as listings or even chain expansions and collaborations with many different protocols. Overall, I'm just here to grow the Pendle ecosystem.
Awesome.
So let's stick with ecosystem growth for a second. I've seen numerous partnerships based on product level. So with Renzo, with Swell, and all other restaking protocols, is this your ecosystem growth strategy, that this is not solely a marketing partnership, but also a product partnership?
Yeah, so I would say that I am involved in all of those conversations. So when it comes to, let's say, us being interested in a certain vertical or narrative that we would like to introduce in the space, let's say listing a new market, then I would spearhead the conversation with those protocols that we would want to work with. So, for example, given the whole restaking narrative, right? The whole liquid restaking with these different tokens, like with EtherFi, Renzo, Kelp, Swell, etc. Then yes, I would be the one coordinating between us, Pendle, and their team on how we could integrate, how we could work together, co-marketing as well, and launch dates. So in general, I do interact with different parties. So this would be like listings, right? Like the typical assets that we would have on Pendle. But also there are integrations that would be integrating some Pendle in some form, like, using our PTs and many other forms, right? Like, maybe we're looking into expanding into a new chain, let's say, or we're looking into using some new bridge. Then I would be handling most of those conversations. Of course, now with the team and given the inbound workload that we have right now, we are kind of like sharing the load across different team members. And there's a lot of help that goes around with dealing with all these conversations.
Okay, you mentioned LRTs, you mentioned PTs. There's an eigenlayer, so maybe we can go a step back. And could you please describe what Pendle is in simple terms, both from the end user perspective and from the builder perspective?
Sure. So our formal definition of Pendle is that it's a protocol that enables the tokenization and trading of yield. And we enable this by taking any yield-bearing token or asset and then splitting them into its principal and yield components, which allows them to be traded via Pendle's AMM. So these components are essentially what we call the yield token or YT and the principal token or PT, right? And we've garnered significant success in the verticals of LRTs, such as, again, like EtherFi's EETH, Renzo's RZETH, Swell's RSWETH, etc. But not only that, we've done really well with liquid staking tokens or LSDs, such as Lido Stake ETH or STETH, perps like JMX's GLP, or even RWA's like Spark's SDI. So Pendle becomes essentially this venue where users can trade and develop strategies around that underlying yield volatility. Now, for retail users, it means that with Pendle, you can obtain a fixed yield or have like leveraged long exposure to its underlying yield. So what does this mean in practice? So I guess like one good example we always use internally and also when explaining to users is the idea of an apartment that earns rent, right? So let's just imagine that there's this real estate property that is earning monthly rent. And effectively, the rental income is the yield generated by the property, right? So this is our yield-bearing asset. So as the owner of the property, I can create a 1-year contract where I split the rental income from the property itself And then I can sell the rights to the rental income for that 1 year market, for 1 year for that market, right? So as the seller, I'm effectively getting my rental income for the entire year upfront. And I'm doing this either because I need the capital upfront now, or I think that the rental income will be going down for the year. So with Pendle, right, we're basically creating this market where you can take this different yield bearing assets, right, which includes that rental property where you can split the rental from the underlying property itself. So the underlying property is the principal and the rental income is the yield. And then you can essentially speculate on the direction of that yield in itself. So I can, for example, as a third party, I can buy a contract to the right to earn that rental income over the span of that 1 year because I don't want exposure to the underlying property itself. So if I think that the rental income will be increasing for this following year, then I should buy it, right? And for the original property owner, if I think that the rental income will reduce or go down within this year, then I should sell it and just collect my rental income upfront. So in Pendle, right, we can basically offer users this kind of venue for them to develop these different strategies. And we work with many different yield-bearing assets that can enable this.
Yeah, so this is really giving me vibes from the whole DeFi summer. I think people are really talking about how Pendle is a part of a group of protocols that's really ushering this new era. And I think you can see a lot of shift from of TVL from your AMMs to your LSD and LRT type protocols. But there's also this moment, like it looks so clear now, but there was this period where you guys really dipped in TVL, and for a long time, I think from the 2022 top of 30 million TVL to a few million, and then the downtrend and that bear lasted a good like a year or a year plus, right? What was going through your minds as you guys did that, and how did you guys actually look to turn that around to get to 4 billion TVL today?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely the traction is quite crazy right now, and I think looking back, ultimately, what did we do right? And I would definitely attribute to like most of the traction that we've garnered now is due to the resilience and hunger for success that the team has. It was especially tough for us during 2022 because this was the height of the bear market, and our traction was kind of like perma down only, right? So even the token price itself was on a downtrend with an all-time low of about 3 cents. So yeah, and when we'd attend conferences, and I remember you and I, we would be attending Avalanche Summit, and I would be meeting people, and they would be asking me, "Hey, what are you doing?" And "Oh, I'm doing this Pendle thing. This is what Pendle is." And it always was, something where they don't recognize what Pendle is, and I would always have to explain them what it is. And there's always this confusion of they don't really understand what the idea of trading the yield and yield splitting is, right? So it was always an uphill battle for us. Since those early 2022 onwards, right? And I think how we learned and got out of this is maybe 4 high level problems that we've recognized and tackled on. So first of all was that with our version 1, which was released around June, July 2021, we recognized that it was clunky at first. There's many different inefficiencies when using the protocol, right? So, for example, when it comes to liquidity or even the trading experience, the fundamental properties of the protocol itself did not enable a lot of these things where, or the core expectations of the user, right? And we recognize this. And second point is that the product experience was very complex, confusing, and difficult to navigate. So if you had used our version 1 product, like our DApp, then you would have noticed how difficult it was to navigate the whole thing. It was, we introduced new terms to the user. So this whole idea of YTs, and then previously we used to call it OTs instead of PTs. But yeah, users were showered with all this different terminology, and that inherently kind of confused the user much more, right, to use the product. And third one would be that I think that users, when they first hear about Pendle, it would take them a hard time to understand what we were trying to do. So the idea of yield splitting was also very new at that time, right? So for us trying to explain to users that you can trade the yield and you can split the yield and trade, the principal of the yield separately, it was a concept that was difficult for many users, even those who are DeFi savvy, to grasp, essentially, right? And it was exponentially even more difficult back then, given the current state of the market, like given the bear market. And then I think the last point, the fourth point, is that we didn't have any product market fit or PMF back then, right? So even though yield is everywhere in DeFi, we didn't know what would be a good use case for yield splitting and trading the yield. And so we would always find ways to attach ourselves, right, to current like trends or narratives to see if there would be a use case for us. But overall, it was difficult for us to find a footing there, right, and to see like which one made sense for us. So that was like the difficult part. And maybe if I can continue expanding from there, like how did we climbed out of that difficulty, So going back to those 4 points, right? So back with the difficulties or the inefficiencies of version 1, as early as August of 2021, we actually started ideating on our version 2. So again, we recognized all these inefficiencies, and now we were discussing on how we can improve it further, right? Of course, with 2022, this was the height of the Luna crash. FTX started shutting down. All of these things we both remember what had happened back then, right? And we were very quiet back then, so we didn't have a lot of announcements to share, and so people thought that we kind of like disappeared and stuff. But actually, we were just busy building the next version of our protocol. And continuing on like version 1.2, which is our product being complex. If you compare what you see right now compared to the first version, it's a whole different world, right? So right now, the feedback we've been getting is that our user experience is much better. When they visit the app, they actually understand what's going on. They can, see charts. They know what exactly they're trading, etc. Right? So I think us overhauling the whole user experience really did well for us, for users trying to kind of like understand and get what we're trying to do and what enables them to do and what strategies they can like effectively execute on Pendle as well.
One thing, just quickly on this point, is that I've consistently seen and felt and heard from people is that your onboarding education is the best in DeFi. And I actually have to agree.
Yeah, so that's actually the third main point that I also wanted to raise, is that given the complexity of the idea of Pendle, right, the idea of yield splitting, it being complex, we doubled down really hard on education, right? So if you've noticed, the way we present ourselves right now with version 2, with our site, etc., we've always found a way to educate users on what we exactly do. So we have this in-app learning center where you can go there and learn about Pendle. We have Pendle Academy, which is this Git book where you can go through a set of courses to learn more about Pendle. And each time we do an announcement, like with a listing or integration, etc., we always go back to the fundamentals of how Pendle works. Explaining how YT and PT works, how it affects with the integration with the current product, let's say with LRTs, and then just explain it repeatedly, right? And I think through this repetition, that's when people started to get it. And we're always doing that because I think that we're still, given a Pendle, we're still a complex product. And I think if we just repeat it long enough, and when people start understanding it and they also start explaining to other people, that's when we'll start seeing the conversion with all these efforts. So yeah, for sure.
I'm always also curious if your success comes from the education, better user experience. These are very important aspects. But at the end of the day, people are probably coming to your protocol to earn more money, to earn more yield, to leverage their position, right? Where does the leveraged risk come from? Like, I've seen, for example, that if you come with Renzo's liquid staking ETH, you can get like 50% yield, and on top of that, you get Renzo points, which will be probably used for airdrop and stuff like that. So, could you explain in simple terms where does this 50% coming from?
Sure. So I would really contrast it against something like Luna, where, you can get like a 20% yield there, but the 20% is actually coming from, Terra Labs itself propping up the yield by offering all of these incentives themselves, right? So they're actually paying for those incentives. Now for Pendle, what you're actually trying to do here is that you're trading the yield, right? So you take a yield-bearing asset like EtherFi's EETH, right? And EETH itself earns an underlying yield from staking ETH, right, of about, let's say, 3.5%. So this is the real underlying yield that is given to ETH holders, and that comes from the staking yield on Ethereum. Now, when we split this in Pendle, you basically have this component that represents just that 3.5%, and then one component that just represents the principal. And then we have people speculate on the yield itself. So what they're essentially doing is that they're implying what the future yield will be using Pendle, right? So one a good example is that on with EtherFi and with these different LRTs like Renzo, because of the whole points meta, they think that the yield that you're getting from YT is not just the underlying yield itself, so not just the staking yield, but they're also getting external yield in the form of points that will be, turned or converted into tokens when it happens, and maybe other forms of yield, right? So that in itself is priced in, and they do that by, because they think that the yield is actually higher than the underlying yield itself, then they will buy the YT, right? So that increases the price of YT, and they're implying that the actual yield of YT would be, let's say, 60%, right? But of course, they are speculating on the actual yield that they'll be getting. They're just thinking that the actual yield that they'll be returning over a period of time is 60%, right? So that's the speculative part. Now, for the other side, which is PT, this is your fixed rate asset. And that essentially means that you're just buying the underlying yield-bearing asset, or ETH, at a discount. And then at maturity, you're able to redeem it one-to-one for the underlying asset itself. And since there's this inverse relationship between PT and YT, where, as more people buy YT, then PT becomes cheaper. Then, of course, at like a 60% implied yield, you are able to also fix your yield at that point, right? And the people who are paying it are actually the people who are buying YT, right? Because for YT, you're foregoing all the right to earn. You're getting the right to earn all the underlying yield, but you're foregoing your right to get back the principal at maturity. But for the PT holders, you're foregoing the right to earn all those yields, like those points, the staking yield, etc. But you're actually betting on getting more of the principal back by buying the principal cheaper, such that at maturity, you can redeem more back. So that is the bet between both sides. One bets on just the yield itself, and one bets on getting more of the principal back at maturity.
So, what do you have to say to people that actually talk about this whole restaking trend? So they talk about restaking with ETH, with other assets, and then you have eigenlayer, and you have more smart contracts and liquidation risk coming up with leverage restaking via Gearbox, via Pendle. So basically what they're saying is that it's a Ponzi, it's a house of cards, and you're gonna eventually at some point it's gonna blow up, or it's gonna rock people, right? So this is something that we see quite common in the market. That said, you have a lot of people who are, because of the yield, just gonna ape in until they think it blows up. So even the people that say it's gonna blow up are still in, earning that yield as well.
Yep.
Do you think that those kind of criticisms or observations are true, or do you guys have a different take on this?
I think it's definitely fair, right, that there would be concerns and apprehension of such products. And I think it's just a given of how DeFi enables all this, right? So DeFi is all about money Legos and interoperability, where you can create a protocol and you basically allow anyone to integrate you and use you in some way. And this permissionlessness has enabled anyone to build products on top of you, and thus those several layers, right, of risk and more derivatives being produced. So of course, with the basic primitive of restaking, you can basically take that and have other protocols like Pendle, Gearbox, etc. built on top of it, because it is permissionless, and then build more mechanisms around it where it would produce higher yield, right? But of course, with that higher yield entails more risk for the user, because they're now exposed to several layers of risk. First is the staking yield itself of Ethereum. Next is the eigenlayer risk, which is with the eigenlayer smart contracts itself. And then also, of course, with the restaking protocol like EtherFi that would work with eigenlayer to create that restaking token. And then for the likes of Pendle and Gearbox and many others who are using that LRT to build more products around it. So for us, we take that LRT, we produce more tokens like YT and PT for it, and then PT would represent, let's say, this fixed rate asset that can be used somewhere else, like in Silo Finance, which is a money market, or Dolomite or Time Swap, and then they can create or use it as collateral to borrow against it, right? So more layers of complexity around it, more layers of risk, but overall, it's something that you can't really stop given the permissionless nature of DeFi. And I think the only way to solve all of this inherent risk is one, we create mechanisms around it to limit the growth of that, which I don't think anyone really wants. Or you can build, securities in place to make sure that no such things happen. And I think, given the growth of how DeFi has evolved over these years, I think that we'll always find a design that would make sure that such risks would be minimized over time, right? So, if you've always been following the evolution of the space, like given the ICO boom during 2017 and then DeFi summer, they've always gone through these iterations where we had different models of things, right? And I think we're at this model where people are experimenting with LRTs and different derivatives out of it. And I think that if something just doesn't work, then on the next cycle, we'll definitely have something that will do. So that's just the nature of the space in a way.
So, just to tag on to that at the end, it's essentially this trial and error process. It happened in the last cycle. It might happen again, and then we'll have to figure it out. Basically, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, in general, that's kind of why we're here, right? And the space will always make mistakes. There are definitely people there who are too degen enough that will create really crazy products that people will ape in and lose money, and that's a given for sure. And some experiments will fail for sure, right? But beyond that, I think that we will always create more mature products that everyone will be able to use safely. So one good example is during the last cycle, we were first introduced with the likes of Aave, Compound, Uniswap. These things were fairly new earlier on, right? So people were not very familiar with trading on an AMM or being able to, borrow and lend through a money market, right? So if you were there since 2017, we didn't have such products back then. And, from those basic primitives, a Uniswap AMM with Kyber or with Aave and Compound, people started to build products on top of them. So maybe using the Aave's A tokens to create, Yearn Finance, which is leveraging by looping or creating strategies around it. And they're still around and they're still doing well. Or you have Curve and Convex, where Curve does, a more efficient way of swaps between stable coins or very stable assets. People have built on top of that with Convex, for example, or you've seen Balancer and Aura. So, many examples like that, right? And I think over time, they've definitely encountered hurdles, but over time, they've settled and are working as expected, right? And people can use them confidently. So I think that will be the same for, this explosion of LRTs and LSTs. In fact, I think for LSTs, people have been confident enough to pour such a great amount of capital in it. If you've seen with Lido, right, and their market cap, it's in the hundreds of billions already, and people are confident enough to be able to use that for their own use. And I think hopefully, cross fingers, and we can't really say what will entail in the future and whether the whole experiment on restaking blows up. But I think that people are responsible enough. In fact, if you follow Twitter, people are calling out on certain designs, right, whether it's something works or not. And because we just want to avoid these huge downturns and explosions. And I think that's just a given of the space maturing over time. And I think will continue maturing over time.
So when we look at CeFi products, including exchanges and custodial providers, they offer conservative end products such as staking, lending, or liquidity provisioning. However, the centralized alternatives in DeFi often outpace CeFi in terms of innovation, flexibility, rewards, stuff like that. And I think Pendle is displaying it most profoundly. So do you think that CeFi products will somehow implement more innovative Pendle solutions? Or they're a little bit afraid of that? They need to see what's going on. And I don't know, in 2 years, they will look into that. What's your take on CeFi when it comes to Pendle and the whole restaking innovation?
For sure. So I think like for these centralized products, right? We have Binance Earn, Coinbase Earn, and the different Earn products out there, and they actually are deploying, users' capital on different DeFi projects to be able to earn a yield for their users. So we're actually a beneficiary from that in one way where like let's say like for one of these wallets, right, like like a BitGet, etc., or like BitGet Earn, where they can earn like they can buy a fixed rate on Pendle, and that would be the yield that they would be passing back to their users who are using the centralized platform. So they are using DeFi protocols such as us in such a way, and I think that would be the way moving forward because I think it's all about Lindy, right? So if there's a protocol out there that has been existing for a number of years, they've never been hacked, and they have this large amount of capital, and anyone can essentially use it. Like one good example again is Aave and Uniswap. Then of course it's in decentralized services interest to be able to make use and take advantage of these services and then pass the yield back to their users, right? And they can do it in many different strategies. Of course, there are higher APYs out there, but like sane minds always take over, and they would always use the ones that are the most secure or the ones that make the most sense. So for us, how we position ourselves is that we have this Pendle Earn product, and this Pendle Earn is still using the same underlying smart contracts, except that we strip away all the complexities of what the whole Pendle suite like gives out, right, to the most savvy users. So all they see is an APY number. And again, right, APY is the most recognizable term in all of DeFi, right? So that's what we show to users, where you can just basically get this APY. But on the back end, what they're actually just doing is just buying a fixed rate. And then that fixed rate would be the yield that they're getting by using Pendle. And we integrate with centralized services that offer like an earn service or maybe through a wallet, and then they integrate Pendle in some way, and they do it by doing that by just buying the fixed rate asset.
That's interesting. Talking around those centralized services and integrations, I think this also ties in with a question I want to ask, which is there a deliberate effort on you guys' part to actually woo institutional TVL as well? Because I noticed that you guys have team members now that are focused on, let's say, talking to your proprietary trading firms, crypto funds, DAO treasuries, family offices to obviously put in volumes or to put in size amounts of TVL. And is that one of the key strategies moving forward?
Yeah, definitely. So we have a guy, his name is Ken. He's actually one of the most public faces of Pendle as well. And he mostly interfaces with these different institutions, right? So we are trying to get these different liquid funds or people with treasuries to be able to use Pendle in their own strategy to grow their treasury or their fund in some way, right? And the simplest way is just to be able for you to buy a fixed rate. So you can think of look at Pendle as just a way for you to hedge your positions, right? So if let's say you are getting this very high yield from this liquid restaking token, then why don't you hedge the APY that you're getting by buying the fixed rate version of it, right? And of course, that yield is kind of like guaranteed because you just have to wait until maturity for you to redeem back all the yield that you've accrued over that period of time. So yes, so of course, it's a difficult start at first, where most funds would be apprehensive of using your protocol because you may be fairly new, or there not be enough liquidity for them to be able to deploy their fund in size. But over time, as we grew, then I think that's when most funds will be confident enough to be able to deploy. And of course, with this additional liquidity, then it's good for everyone overall, right? Because with that liquidity, then people will be able to trade with this little slippage or price impact for the different Pendle assets that they have, like with trading YT or PTs, etc.
So it's all about risk management, isn't it?
Yep. And that's what we offer. If you think, yeah, exactly. So if you think, remember the whole Olympus DAO with 100,000 APYs, but back then there was no venue to be able to hedge your risk against that 100,000 APYs, right? But if we had Pendle back then why wouldn't you want to buy a fixed rate of that, right? So you can still have the apes where they would ape into the yield portion, where they think that the yield of Ohm would go upwards of 200,000. But then you had the other side where they want to hedge the risk and buy the fixed rate asset of that.
I see. They would have solved some problems.
I'm also wondering how Pendle in general is working towards mass adoption, because if someone is listening to us today and is completely new to crypto, they probably turn off the episode of the third minute because they don't know what yield is, restaking, eigenlayer, all the technical stuff. But then we need those masses to make Web3 adopted. So how do you envision Pendle as a driving force in DeFi adoption?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's definitely a goal for us as well, is to be able to onboard the next, generational users in Web3, right? But I think we can look into this in several layers. So first of all, again, Pendle is a very complex product. In fact, most of DeFi is very complex for very new users into the space. One of the core problems that people still face is that if they're installing a wallet like MetaMask, high chances they're going to get phished or they're going to get hacked, right? They're going to lose their funds. They're still trying to figure out like what is an approval and how to read a block explorer. So we still have all these compounding problems that face new users that are trying to get into Web3, right? And most of these are still fairly unsolved, right? And I think once we kind of like mature more and develop more this core technologies that help alleviate that, like we have account abstraction that's coming, right? And we have things that lessen transaction costs. Those are actually things that kind of like scare new users away. But those things are, coming. In fact, with 4844 now deployed, it has made transacting on L2s much cheaper. But of course, beyond that, there is still the problem of, phishing, using wallets, and all the complexities with using Web3. And I think that's okay, right? Because I think for those who are really serious into getting into Web3, for those who are serious into getting into DeFi, you really have to go through the journey of learning everything, right? Because that's only where you get the alpha, right? We can't spoon feed people. And for us as protocol developers and owners, we try to make it as simple as possible so that, for users who are going through this journey, we make it as seamless as possible for them to open our site, read as little as they can about it, but then from there they can understand and then execute whatever they want to, like the strategies that they want to do on your product. So I think for us that effort is by doing Pendle Earn. But I think beyond that, if there are things that we'd want to integrate, like maybe if this account abstraction is more mature, then we would probably want to do something there. And maybe on mobile as well, right? Like, if we can have a simpler way where mobile users can access these different DeFi products, then all the better. But I think, I think it just comes like over time, right? So again, like if you look way back, last DeFi summer, or even the start of Ethereum, things were inherently much more complex. And if you compare it to today, with all the different tools that we have, you can find so much information. You can like find different explorers already out there, different wallets, and you have the choice to be able to use all these, right? It's just in your fingertips to, learn and go through this journey yourself. But, in the end, we can't handhold you in everything. So you as a user have to learn for yourself for sure.
Yeah, I remember the first time I got wrecked and wrapped. So like
we all have.
Yeah, we all have this part of the journey, right? So like I hear that you guys are looking at certain things upcoming with account abstraction and mobile when things are more mature. That's pretty interesting. And do you have a specific take around, like, because like everyone's thinking about mass adoption, everyone's trying to work towards mass adoption, or maybe people who are cynical don't believe that there's mass adoption. Do you have a certain take around crypto mass adoption, DeFi, that you think is unique, or you think most people are wrong about, that you'd like to share?
Yeah. So I guess we can go back to the question, like, what does mass adoption look like? Is it my uncle or my dad, just saying, "Oh, I download this app, Pendle app, and now I'm getting fixed rate"? It's something that I can't really imagine because my dad is kind of like, I would say that it takes a while for him to learn new technology right now. I'm sure that, there are people who have parents that are still having difficulty learning how to use a smartphone, for example, right? But, I imagine that given how fast the current generation, the younger generation, isn't learning new stuff, I think that mass adoption would look like, well, we've kind of like seen a glimpse of that last cycle, right? Remember that whole NFT boom, people having PFPs and people posting like billboards in New York City, like Times Square on Bored Apes, etc. And then different celebrities, right, like buying this different NFTs, right? So maybe mass adoption looks like that, where it's being talked about everywhere. in the media, and your friends are talking about it. Like, for example, in the Philippines, right? Everyone in the Philippines knew about Axie and were playing Axie because it was one way for them to play and earn. And that was mass adoption in the Philippine context, right?
Yeah.
So in the DeFi context, then that would be a similar case where if you would go to, let's say, Vietnam, you would go to Thailand, the Philippines, and then you simply talk about staking rewards, right? Like the word or the terminology staking is so well known that everyone actually understands what it entails, right? So I can actually just talk to a guy and says, "What's your investing strategy?" And he says, "Oh, I'm just staking," and he already understands what that means, and that to me would be mass adoption, right?
Yeah, and also when someone talks about WIF on a sphere in Las Vegas or something like that, I think that's going to come very
Yeah,
soon as well.
exactly.
Yeah. I do have a curiosity as well. Like you've been around in the space, I think for a good, correct me if I'm wrong, 6 plus, maybe 7 years, even since the ICO times. What keeps you in the space? What keeps you excited about the space? What keeps you hopeful in the space?
Yep. Yeah. So I think I really resonate with what Aya Miyaguchi said. So, Aya from the Ethereum Foundation about an infinite garden, right? So for me, it's all about creating permissionless mechanisms that can create infinite games. And, with this, like different infinite games where you can access permissionlessly, not only can you use them, but you can also build more on top of it, right? So, given the example of just staking in general, right? Like Ethereum staking, imagine all the different products that has come out of that, right? And or just imagine the whole ERC 721 standard and what came out of that, right? So you had PFPs, you had GameFi, you had Axie, and all the upcoming games that entailed just out of that standard. So I think for me, the motivation is that can we build a much better, like not just financial, right, but technological world where we have all this open systems, permissionless systems, right, where people can not only use them permissionlessly but also build more on top of it, right? And you can contrast that with our existing structure, which is the likes of the banking financial system, where just to be able to take a loan or use any of these financial services, you need to be an accredited investor, you need to KYC, you need to give up all this stuff to an opaque black box where you don't actually know what's happening with your own data, right? Or even maybe using centralized services like, let's say, like Amazon before you need to, or like maybe even something like the Epic Store, like or like the Google Store, where if you upload your app, you are bounded by the rules of Google and Apple and what they have for your app, right? So if you go against whatever rules that they have, then your app is basically gone from the store, right? So right now, the contrast from that is that we build permissionless systems, and all the rules are instead embedded into smart contracts, where if something is not allowed, you are punished by maybe being splashed, or maybe it's just not a general rule that you can, do. And we have a crypto ecosystem that surrounds this such that it's managed in a very decentralized and transparent way. So that's kind of like the bright future I see this, and working towards that long tail is something that motivates me. So infinite games.
I love
Thanks
that
for
phrase. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it too. I could see, Imran, that you even noted it. So Anton, if someone hasn't heard of Pendle, what's the best place to play around with the protocol? You mentioned also GitHub, like a tutorial. Maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit more. Whom to follow on Twitter for some alpha, Pendle alpha. How to get involved with the ecosystem, in short.
Sure. Yeah. So a lot of these resources, you can just simply visit our website, pendle.finance. And from there, you can find links to our Discord. We have a Telegram group as well, mainly for announcements. We have our Twitter over there, and you'll be able to follow all our announcements. But overall, you'll also be able to find the link to our app. And then from our app, you'll find links to that Pendle Academy, that in-app learning center. So you'll be able to find a lot of resources there, right? But overall, I think the good way to start is just to join our Discord community, because right now it's really active and there's a lot of users who are starting their journey and trying to learn Pendle as well. So for you who are curious on how you can enact your strategies on being able to trade the yield or getting a fixed rate, then you can do so by interacting with different users that we have in our Discord. And of course on Twitter or X, you can follow me, and my ID over there is AYO Buena Vista, so my last name. I'm not that active in X, Twitter, because I'm kind of like busy, heads down building. But you can also follow Tian, which is our CEO. He's our most public facing guy. So Tian_Pendle. We have actually a lot of different guys who are on Twitter as well. But Tian would be, I guess, the most active one tweeting around. And yeah, on Twitter as well, we have Pendle Intern. So he's the guy with the most alpha, and you should definitely give him a follow. Just to be able to know what you can do by using Pendle. Yeah.
And what's the alpha that you can give us on this call here for the viewers?
Right. So I would say that, given the market right now, and it's kind of like we're still in the early innings of the bull market, in my opinion, right? We're still not even at the halving yet for Bitcoin. So we don't know how far this trend goes. And I hope that things are different. We don't have another bear cycle or something, catastrophic happen. But I think that there's a lot of things that's being launched right now, right? So both, some team out there launching new protocol, or some team out there integrating Pendle in some way and introducing a new protocol out there. And I think it's in your benefit to be able to explore all these, because they might be doing some points campaign right now. They might be doing an airdrop in the future, just to be able to reward you to explore those protocols, right? And now is kind of like a great time to be able to get your feet wet and use those different protocols, because it might be good for you. I mean, it would be very beneficial for you in the long run, right? Not only are you learning, but you'll be incentivized to do so. And I think that, yeah, and with liquid restaking and restaking overall, of course, just practice due caution. Don't be a complete degen and just ape in your entire life savings and net worth to one thing. For anything else, just be cautious and approach things with a sane mind. I would say, right? So yeah, and I think just enjoy the journey overall. And there's a lot of things to use. Like you have Imran here from Zeto Markets, and them doing stuff on perps is really, really cool on Solana. So definitely take a look in Solana as well, because there's a lot of things happening there, not just meme coins. And on the EVM side, you can definitely take a look at Arbitrum and on Ethereum, and use the likes of Pendle to be able to explore LRTs and RWAs and LSTs and whatnot. So yeah, there's a lot for sure to be done now. Yeah, for sure.
It's a fat stack of alpha. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So it's alpha season, and I hope it lasts for sure.
Okay, so I think we can wrap it up. Anton, thanks so much for sharing so many insights. Even though I did some research on Pendle, you just opened so many doors in my mind that after recording it, I'll just need to sit down with my computer and go all in and see what the ecosystem is about. And yeah, and then thanks for sharing alpha. Hopefully, we will
happy to be here.
Take another time to record another episode. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure.
Cheers, Anton.
Yeah, you're welcome. And looking forward to the next episodes. So cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Left.